Good morning, church, or I guess whatever time it is that you choose to participate in worship with me here today. It is the 22nd of March, which makes it the second Sunday of our collective isolation together. It still just feels so very strange, doesn't it? This disease has driven us into our homes and had us trying to protect one another from an illness that could be quite dangerous to some of us, and yet it just doesn't feel okay not to be together. I've been reflecting a lot about what to say on this second Sunday, and I want to spend some time encouraging us to be contemplative about our lives and about what we've got with us, and some things that we need and some things that we don't. So without further mumbling, I'm going to go ahead and get into this and talk about take what you need. And taking only what you need is really what I'm talking about. And here, I'm not really talking about what you see at Aldi or at Costco or Sam's or Walmart or whatever. There, you should probably take only what you need as well, and it won't infect all of us. But really, what I want to think of is about a metaphor of going on a journey. Every summer, before I moved to North Carolina, my family would make a long trip, several weeks. I was a professor, and so I would get the summers off, and we would take those summers and we would travel. We would actually travel here to North Carolina. And so we'd throw all of our stuff that we were going to need for the next 5 weeks or so onto the roof of our van, and off we would go on that unbearably long journey. It says that it's 19 or 18 hours or so. It lies. It's much, much longer than that. But we would drive this long journey, stopping and seeing loved ones along the way, and then spending a good deal of time in Hendersonville before returning back. Before we'd make that long trip, the first thing you've got to do is go out into the garage and find your bags. And there they are, up in the corner, up on the top shelf above the ladder. There's a couple of suitcases. But that, by the way, is not our garage. But it looked something like that, I suppose. And you'd have to go and find the bags that you were going to use. They've been sitting out there in that garage. And I don't care how good your garage is, there's probably some kind of critters that have gotten into it over the course of the time you haven't used it across the winter time. So the first thing you've got to do is get that thing down and you got to clean it out. There's stuff in there you don't want, like dead bugs or spiders, or maybe if you're really unlucky, some mouse droppings or whatever. And so you've got to go through it before you put anything into it. You got to cleanse it. You got to get that stuff that you do not want to take with you. You want to get that out of there. If you're really dumb, maybe you find laundry that you had totally forgotten about that's still in that bag that you put up in the garage, and you kick yourself for being so silly. And then you get those bags, you clean them out, and you make sure that they're actually ready, and then you start putting stuff into them. If you married well, as I did, then your bag ends up looking like that. It's really well packed, and usually you make sure that you've got everything in there you want. If you're really well packed, maybe all of your underwear is in a cube that you can take out that one cube when you get where you're going, and then put those all into a drawer or something. I got to tell you that every year when we made this trip, I was reminded of the truth that my wife is absolutely a superhero, because she would go into this thing and see to it that there were 5 of us, and all 5 of us were packed with everything that we would need. I am a big boy. I did do my own packing, but that's about it. She did the rest of the family because she's amazing. And I don't think we ever had to buy anything. You know, when we got where we're going, she'd always thought of everything. She'd put into the bags exactly what we would need. And, you know, I didn't ever get there and find a whole bunch of roaches in anybody's bag, because we'd made sure that the stuff we didn't want, yeah, it was gone. But you got to think about where you're going when you're going to make a journey. If you're going to go to some place that looks like this, I'm very jealous of you. But if you're going to do that, then you probably don't need this. I mean, a tauntaun's not very useful And I'm sorry, that's nerdy. I know. I'm actually thinking of the parka. If you showed up in Hawaii and you had Han Solo's parka, it's not going to be snow crusted. It's going to be sweat soaked because you just don't need that item in that place. Conversely, if you were planning a trip to, say, the Alaskan Arctic tundra to examine, I don't know, whatever shrubbery grows there. If you wanted to go and hike around there and try not to die, then you probably wouldn't want to look to Elvis Presley in his Hawaiian movie as the example for your wardrobe. And there are several reasons for that. One is you're just not going to look as good as Elvis did in the Hawaiian shirt. But another is the truth of frostbite and hypothermia, that if you were to dress that way, it's not going to go well for you up there in the Arctic. Why? Because you haven't brought what you need. And when you get there, the people who are there are going to look at you and go, okay, yeah, that person's gonna die. They're not equipped for life here. You see, the truth is you pack what you need for the destination you're headed to, and you leave behind what you don't. That's wise packing. Don't carry what you don't need, and make sure that you have what you do. But what if, instead of a trip, you're actually moving and never planning on coming back? You're never returning to the place that you left behind. We did that same trip, the same trip from Lubbock to here. We moved here. And let me tell you about just a couple of things that you do. One thing that you do is you make sure that you get rid of those things that you do not want to move. Maybe you've acquired things during your time in one place that you know are not going to be useful at all in the place where you're headed. A hammock is really nice in the tropics, but not so useful in the Arctic. Or, a snow shovel or snow plow or a snow blower. That's the word I'm looking for. That's really good when you live in Massachusetts, but when you live in Florida, you don't really need that. So you make sure that you get rid of those things that are just not going to be fitted to the life where you're going. They're not going to be well suited. They're not going to be useful. If you were to move them there with you, when you got there, you'd look at them and you'd think, man, I'm such a fool. Why did I bring this? I could have gotten rid of it. And we should. We should look at things that we don't need and get rid of them. When I was a very young child, and here I don't remember this move at all. I was just 18 months old. But my family made a move from Florida to Iowa. Tallahassee, Florida to Iowa City, Iowa. And we did that move in the wintertime. When we arrived there, we all had nothing but short-sleeve shirts, and not one of us owned a winter coat. Very quickly, the church in Iowa City took great compassion on this recent PhD graduate, my father and his family, and supplied us with coats, and we went around and got what we needed in order to live in Iowa. But it would have been really good, I've been told, to have had those coats before we arrived, to have well prepared for the journey. Now, of course, all of this is a metaphor. I'm talking about another journey. What is the journey that we are expecting? Religious people tend to think about life in terms of a journey. And we tend to think about life ending not as journey's end, but as journey's true beginning. In order to talk about that, I want to talk about when I was very first married. I'm going to take that image off the screen. But in the early days of our marriage, just remember it, okay? Like you can forget that picture. But in the early days of our marriage, back when Ashley and I looked like that and all that hair. Anyway, back then, man, isn't she gorgeous? Sorry, distracted. Anyway, when we looked like that, we had only been married just a few weeks, and I got a bump that started growing on the roof of my mouth. I have a scar there to this day, because eventually that thing got so big that when I finally went to see the ear, nose, and throat specialist, and he looked at it, he said, well, there's a chance that's not cancer. I was 26 years old. I just had married a young wife. And hearing the word cancer come out of a doctor who's looking at a thing, that's pretty chilling. They removed it. They excised it with a laser, which was kind of fancy surgery, and it hurt more than I care to go into. And they ran all kinds of tests on it. They destroyed it. They never did figure out what the lump on the roof of my mouth was, what kind of disease had produced it. It was something awful, but don't know what it was. But they came back with the news that it was not cancer. And I got to tell you, there are no better words that I've ever heard than not cancer. You see, when you hear those words, when you hear the word cancer, even at the age of 26, the first thing that you think of, the first thing that hits you, and in a way it was the very first time that it ever hit me in my life, is the truth of my mortality. That I very genuinely am going on a journey, like it or not. And it's one that really my life here is to prepare for. That I have a journey to take into the heart of God. And that the launch of that journey is going to come to me someday. And I can't prepare for it. Or, no, I can prepare for it. I can't tell when that journey launch is going to be. I don't know when it's going to happen. So really, my time here is about preparing. And it's not just about me. It's about all of us. The author of Fight Club, Chuck Palahniuk, that guy right there in the picture, once wrote on a long enough timeline, the survival rate for everyone drops to 0. Let me read that again. On a long enough timeline, the survival rate for everyone drops to 0. Nobody gets out of here alive. Ultimately, life has a terminus point. Except that we, by our faith, know that that's not entirely true. Life on this cursed earth ends. But does life end? Jesus said that he came that we might have life and that we might have it in abundance. He said that he is the life and that everyone who believes in him will have eternal life. And so we know better, but we also know that life in this world, it's a temporary thing, a thing on loan before we get a permanent possession. And we'll have that permanent possession when we take a journey. Obviously, the reason that these ideas have been floating around in my head is because that our culture has been confronted with a mortality check. Something entirely out of our control. It's been interesting to me to watch the responses to this. Some people have just wanted to deny this disease, that it's any big deal at all, and just say, it's all a media overblow. It's just all a panic. It's no big deal. Other people that I've encountered have absolutely panicked. Christian friends that I've got have been really very afraid. And it has made me reflect on the brevity of life and the truth. What is life's purpose here? Why are we here? This thing that threatens to shorten our lives, it doesn't threaten to shorten it very, very much. Certainly not when measured against eternity. Our lives are short anyway. No matter what. What is 80, 90, 100, or even 120 years when measured against 1,000,000? And 1,000,000 is a drop in the ocean of eternity. And not even the ocean, but the vastness of space, the infinite. What is life about? Well, the truth is, and this is what faith tells us, one of the things that I think faith is given to us for is to help us to realize and contemplate with this reality. We are all going to take a journey. No one gets out of here alive. We will all die. And whether it's tomorrow or in another 50 years, I know that I will not live in this cursed existence forever. Someday I'm going to be free of it. And I'm going somewhere else. Now, what that somewhere else is, great minds struggle on that one. But I know that it will be different from here. Wherever and whatever it is, I'm going to a different place. And what I think is some of the most important questions in life is, what stuff do I have right now with me, in me, that I won't need when I get there? What am I carrying now? What am I practicing now? What is there inside of me now that I just don't need? Because if I'm going to be in that other place much, much longer than I am here, then I would do well to prepare for that other place in the brief time that I am here. Well, if there are going to be things that I can't take with me there, why bear them here? Why carry them here? It's like cleaning out the bag or doing the garage sale. There is stuff I simply need to get rid of. And also, what don't I have that I will need when I get there? I don't have it here. It's not naturally mine. Or maybe I have some, but I don't have enough. Like I've got a shirt, but not a parka. What is there in me that is lacking? What is there about me? Of course, the journey I'm talking about taking is to heaven. And I need to think in terms of the climate and topography and what is that place like? Who am I and how will I fit in there? What am I bringing with me currently? I've got it with me and it's like I've packed some stuff up for the journey that I need to look at and go, no, this is not necessary. I don't need this. And of course, I'm not just packing a bag, I'm packing my heart. Or what is there that's in my heart where there's way too much space that needs to be filled in with things that I am really going to need? It'd be very good if I could look to an expert. You know, my wife was really good at figuring this stuff out. I'm honestly not all that good at it. She's kind of an expert. What is the expert for the journey to heaven? Where do I go there? Well, there are several, what I would encourage you to think of right now as packing lists that we run into in the scriptures. Places where we are told to get rid of stuff that we don't need and to put on stuff that we do. And I'm going to suggest that part of it is because the life well lived in this place that's our temporary home is a life lived with the stuff of heaven. But a lot of it, I think, is because we need to be prepared to be creatures of heaven. We live better here if we live like, in terms of our character and our nature and the way that we behave, we already live there. But I think that when we get ready to go there, if we're going to want to be able to enjoy it, I mean, can you imagine showing up in the tundra dressed like Elvis in the Hawaiian movies? You'd be miserable even if you were someplace pretty. Or imagine going in a full ski gear, parka, long johns outfit to the beach. It'd be awful. These packing lists, I'm not going to look at them in any of them closely, but I encourage you to get out your scriptures this week in light of this sermon and think about them. Go through them each and look at your heart. Take an inventory of what's there. The first one is the first chapter of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 48. Most of what's here is a response to the law of Moses. It's actually teaching us how to read the law of Moses. And here, Jesus is directing us away from a heart that's rebellious to God's will and toward a heart that is submissive to it and cooperative with it. Each of these things that he looks at in the law of Moses will help us to find things that are inside of ourselves that we should not have, that I can look at and say, I don't need that. I should get rid of that. Generally, it's very hard to get rid of it because I want to hold on to it. Because in the place where I currently live, maybe it's got some use, or maybe it comes pretty easily, but it's not worth having. And each time Jesus talks about these, he also encourages a better way, the way of heaven, the way the people who live there will act and behave. It's a good packing list. Paul offers, I've got 3 of these that come from the Apostle Paul. In Galatians chapter 5, verses 16 through 26, Paul talks about the being cooperative with the Holy Spirit. And he talks about the works of the flesh, the stuff that we just naturally do here, that our inclinations drive us towards, our unmanaged hungers direct us into. And they're all problematic. I used the example earlier of roaches and rodent droppings, and I hope that kind of grossed you out. It's not because we had a real big problem with that in Lubbock in our luggage. It's because I want you to think about a suitcase filled with that kind of stuff. That's what we're often handed in this broken world when it comes to our hearts. Our hearts are packed up with filth and disgusting things. Paul outlines that there, and then he also looks at the contrast of the fruit of the Spirit, the things that fill up, that get packed for us and packed into us as we interact with Jesus Christ through the Holy Spirit of God. As we settle into the Spirit, He fills up our suitcase to prepare us for the place where we're going to live. A really long one is found in the book of Ephesians, chapter 4:17 through 5:21, a little more than a chapter there. And you've got a really beautiful look at the stuff you don't need and the stuff that Christ will put into you. And a similar contrast shows up in the book of Colossians in chapter 3. Where Paul walks through, putting to death the things of the flesh and putting on Christ. Now, if I look back over all of those, which is what I've done this week, I've thought about these passages, and I've come up with a list of things that I think Paul and Jesus both would look at and say, yeah, that's not a bad summary. Some of it is stuff to leave behind. Stuff for our spiritual garage sale. Maybe you can sell it to the devil. Maybe he wants it. But you don't need this stuff. It's the stuff to cleanse and clean out of, or as Paul says, put to death. It's the stuff of self-denial. So let's walk through a few of those. One of the things that you see in these lists over and over is how often they focus on the negative behaviors of anger and hate. That it focuses on a wrathfulness, on a spirit that's really easily provoked, and it's easy to get into an argument. It's easy to stir up all kinds of negative responses to other people because it loves itself and it feels offended. So it wants to lash out. Do you think anybody will ever behave that way in heaven? When we stand in the presence of God, will we ever behave carelessly to the harm of others because we are upset, because we are violated, because we are offended? These things just aren't going to be useful in heaven. Bitterness and hate. Hate is the antithesis of heaven. It's its opposite, and it's simply not useful. If you look into the suitcase of your heart and you've got that packed in there, get rid of it. You don't need it now, and you certainly won't be able to use it where you're going. If you're following Christ, this stuff is useless to you both now and forever. One of the things that you see in these lists over and over and over again is the concept of sexual impurity or sexual deviance, where we use sex in very selfish ways. Now, why is this? Is this because, the Christians were just really kind of puritanical, or were they really perverted? Were they really obsessed with sex? No, it's because healthy sexuality has to do with relationship permanence. That a healthy sex life is one of the things that keeps a married couple in love with each other and draws them together. When we misbehave with this stuff, we hurt ourselves and we hurt others in terrible ways. Now, I have no idea what's waiting for us in heaven when it comes to sexuality. I have no idea. But I do know this. Self-satisfaction prioritized over relationship will have no place there. Getting what I want out of this relationship and demanding it and seeking it and insisting on it. Getting my way, especially when it comes to intimacy with others. And also the use of other persons. It's going to have no place there. So I just want my pleasure and I don't really care about you. That won't ever be found there. A departure from the will of God about things that are so important, like intimacy and relationship and covenant life together. None of that's going to be found there. The foundations of marriage and of family, the production of more family. That's why this was such an important thing to God. And its perversion just doesn't have any place here, and the stuff of it will have no place there. I see a rebuke of the need to control others. That we don't need that stuff. There's never any reason for me to lie. I don't have to be mean with my words, but I just don't ever need to lie. Do you think anyone will ever tell even one lie when we enter into eternity? There won't be room for it. Jesus is the truth, and those who live in Jesus live in truth. Now, the reasons that we lie have to do with protecting ourselves, and it has to do with a try to control other people so that we get what we want. If I tell the truth, I won't make the sale. Better to not make the sale than to give away your soul or to take pollution into yourself. Because this stuff that we're packing up now, we're going to take with us. You won't be able to use this there. You'll be embarrassed by it. Or having a vengeful heart. And Jesus talks about, the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, but don't resist someone. But turn the other cheek. Go with them the extra mile. There's no room for vengeance. In heaven, justice is entirely seen to by God, and we can trust him here and now. There is the ugliness of a kind of indifference that many of us pack into our hearts. We've been packing that into our hearts since Cain, who asked, "Am I my brother's keeper?" I don't care about you as long as I'm happy. See, I think that is really the heart of all of fallenness, is it's a selfishness, an unhealthy love of self, which is actually no love at all. But without Christ, all love is really self-love, and it's all corrupted love. I don't really love anybody else without God to lead me out of my selfishness. I just want my way and insist on my own happiness and pleasure. Everyone that I love because they give me joy. But when Christ teaches me something, he teaches me something better. He teaches me against selfishness, because at the root of pride and all sin is a love of the self, which is why Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself. And the truth is, I won't need any of that stuff in heaven. I'm going to be in heaven a lot longer than I'm going to be here, no matter how long I'm here. A lot longer. So if I'm wise, I use the time that I have, however long it is, to see to it that these things are put away. They're just not useful to me. Not here, not there, not anywhere, because they aren't of God. So what will I need in heaven? In order to be well prepared when I get there, what is the stuff that I need? Well, I'll just focus in on one of those lists. I need joy. The ability to be certain that everything is going to be okay. And so I have a contentment, even in the rain. An ability to laugh even while I cry. That's joy. The certainty of God's goodness, no matter what. See, joy doesn't have to exist in bad times, but it can. That's how it's different from happiness. Happiness can only exist based on what's happening. If good stuff's going on, I can be happy. But a person can rejoice when things are great, when there's an excellence about life and somebody succeeds wonderfully. You go to a graduation and you rejoice. You go to a wedding and you rejoice. You go to some sort of victory celebration and there's joy. But here's how joy is different. Joy can happen no matter what. Even in death or suffering or pain. Even when I have to weep, because what's happening is just so awful. And yet, God is good. And I know God is good. So even in the darkness, I can know there is a light. And that the light is not overcome. And that fills me with hope, which fills me with joy. And I will need joy in heaven. Not because there will be darkness, but because I need to know how to rejoice. The wise person packs it into their heart here by trusting in God. Peace. Heaven is an eternity of peace. Shalom is the Hebrew word for peace, and it means more than an absence of conflict. It means the presence of soundness and wholeness and purpose, where everything is good and right and okay. Now, I live in a world right now where there's a lack of peace all around me, and it would encourage me to have a lack of peace within. But the wise traveler prepares for what will be, sets their mind on what will be, and in a way begins to inhabit where they are before they're there. We can have peace even in this world of chaos because of what Christ has done for us and is doing within us. So even in the tumult, we can be at rest. We can have an inner tranquility that keeps us from anxiety and anxiety-produced behaviors. We can rest in the Spirit of God and let Him build goodness inside of us. Patience. I chose for my picture for this one, a picture with a frustrated child and a loving parent looking at this kid going, you know what? Your behavior, it's enough to drive anyone nuts. Anyone who's ever lived with a frustrated child knows that they can really try you, but you also remember this is a child. And this is someone who needs right now my long suffering of their trouble, because the trouble won't last. But I want to last. I want to last in their life and bless them and care for them. Well, the follower of Christ can do that not only with a frustrating child, but a frustrating adult or a frustrating coworker or a frustrating situation, that I can bear up underneath it, suffer it, and look even a lot of suffering in front of me and say, that's okay. That's okay. I can bear this. Because I know someone who's borne it with me and for me and in me and through me, and He gives me the strength to bear it. I can be patient. I don't know that we will try one another in heaven, but all of the things that give life to patience here will be the stuff of life there. So the person who practices patience in this troubled world is really practicing a welcoming spirit towards others that will be the foundational stuff of heaven. Kindness. Kindness, I think, is intentionally and gently doing things for others for their good. Often being put out yourself so that others can be well, allowing yourself to even be denied what you would want so that you can do something good for someone else. It's kindness that holds snarkiness behind our teeth. And it's kindness that helps us to reach out in love and in generosity towards those who are troubled or weak somehow. Heaven, I think, is going to be a place of infinite kindness. The loving kindness of our God towards we who were weak and needed salvation is expressed in Jesus Christ our Lord, particularly on the cross. We will show kindness one to another and to God by lovingly being good to everyone and to each other, and doing all to the goodness and the glory of God. Goodness. That one for me is kind of hard to define. I actually talked to Ashley about it a little bit. I really liked her definition. It led me to the picture I got here of wholesomeness. That a person who is good is devoid of things that are polluted and impure by sin and evil and ugliness. I think goodness is most easily defined in this broken world by what it is not, by what is so common here, evil and trouble and suffering. That a person who has packed their heart with goodness has packed it up with things that are wholesome, true. I find myself wanting to pull on these other virtues that are listed in this list, kindness and patience, but just a desire to be good. Heaven will be a place of infinite goodness, and those who practice it here are preparing for what waits there. Faithfulness. Obviously, heaven is a place for the faithful. It's where they belong. It's what they've prepared for. So if I practice faithfulness here, I'm really preparing for my citizenship test. I'm getting ready to be welcome there and to want to be there. Faithfulness is about believing in God, but more than just believing in Him, because, Satan believes in God, but it does him no good. Faithfulness is about an abiding trust in God, a knowledge that He is real and worthy of our affection, worthy of our love and trust. That's a faithful person. Well, can you imagine any of that being useless in heaven? Gentleness. This is a heart that looks at the things around it that are fragile and treasured, important, and treats them with care and tenderness. Brothers and sisters, there's really nothing more fragile, though we like to pretend otherwise. There's nothing more fragile than the human heart. It's so easy to hurt us, so easy to do us harm. But the person who is prepared for heaven doesn't do harm to anyone else because they treat others as fragile treasures. I don't mean that others are immature and they just can't bear the truth. I don't mean that. I mean that this other person, whoever they are, whether it's a dear sibling in Christ or a stranger I meet in the store or someone who just took the last roll of toilet paper, that person is a treasure, a creation of God, and that a lack of love will do them damage. So I'm going to treat this person with gentleness. If I have to be truthful, I can be truthful in a way that's kind, that doesn't do harm, that I do no harm. I think heaven will be filled with people who never, ever take anybody with anything but the utmost seriousness and seek never to do harm, but only to do good. Self-control. I really liked this picture for self-control because it's a picture of dominoes leading towards, who knows what the last domino to fall might be. This is something that's often used to describe sin, that sin doesn't begin at the moment where you actually practice evil. Generally, sin begins a long time ago when the first thoughts are set in motion that lead you towards the sin. And that the longer you move towards sin, the harder it becomes to stop. But the person who practices self-control is the person who knows, I gotta make sure that I maintain holiness. And I am, in fact, going to stop this cascade before it gets to a point where I can't stop it. I'm going to interrupt the flow of the dominoes and make sure that I do what is good and not what is evil. Self-control comes from God. We are not naturally, I think, in control of ourselves. Our hungers drive us. But as we rest in the presence of God, He leads us to the point where we actually have mastery over ourselves. I think heaven will be filled with well-ordered persons. People who have aligned their hearts as they ought to be aligned and maintain that proper alignment. A person who practices that here will be ready for it when it is there. I moved the first attribute of the list. These, if you haven't recognized them, are the fruits of the Spirit. From the front to the last, because for the same reason, I think Paul put it first because he wanted to emphasize it, and because I think that all of the others are expressions of this one, and from this one flow all those other things. I'm in control of myself. Why? Because of the love. I need to control myself so I do no harm to myself or to anyone else, and it's love that motivates that. Or I'm gentle, or I'm kind. Why? Because of love. And so this one virtue is really all of them. And I think all of it is descriptive. All of those are descriptive of what agape really is. Which is why it's called the fruit of the Spirit and not the fruits of the Spirit. It's singular, not plural, because really it is all one thing. And at the heart of God is this reality, so much so that John could say God is love, that He can be described as agape, that his essence, his nature is perfect and infinite love. So those who are preparing for heaven pack their hearts with this for everyone. It's why Jesus will teach us to practice the hardest kind of love, love for the enemy, and prayer for the one who persecutes. Why? So that we can be sons of our Father, so we can share in the essence of God. We can become like our dad. If we want to be well prepared for there, then we pack this above all else. Because the reality is the place where we're going has a climate. And the climate of heaven is selfless love. Why? Because God is the sun and moon and stars there. He is everything about the weather patterns. He is that place, and we will exist in him and in his nature. And his nature is selfless love. So those who want to be comfortable there, who don't want to find themselves in an unbearable heat of a snow parka on the beach, or freezing to death in a Hawaiian shirt, those who want to be comfortable there pack their hearts well while they are here. So I just have 2 more slides, and there are questions for you to think about this week as you read over the scriptures I've suggested earlier. Here they are. Are your bags cleaned out? Have you gotten rid of what you do not need? As you look through your heart, is there a grudge? Is there an out-of-control hunger? Is there a desire for vengeance? Is there an apathy and indifference towards others? Is your heart cleansed? Because Christ can clean it. He really can. And he'll ask you to work cooperatively with him in the unpacking process, getting that stuff out of there. But he really is the one who makes us clean. And if you're finding stuff in yourself during this time of isolation and contemplation, if you're finding stuff in yourself that needs cleaning out, give it to him. But then the more important question really, are you packed with what you will need? You see, someday, all of us are going to make a journey. We're all going somewhere. And it isn't here. It isn't anything like here. The nature of this place and the nature of that place is as different from one another as is beach and tundra. And that place is hospitable to the redeemed nature. It's a place where those who have spent their time with Jesus, being transformed by him, will live in comfort and in glory, at rest, at peace with themselves, with each other, and with God. Have you packed? Are you ready to go? We never know when this journey is going to come on us. Because of what Jesus has done for us, we can know that the certain journey is filled with a certainty. One way or another, we're going to be okay. I think life here is about getting ready for there.